The explosion tore through the diplomatic wing 3 seconds before Marcus Chen could warn anyone. He moved on instinct, his body already pivoting toward Princess Velsara as crystal and shrapnel screamed through the air. The Kashari princess barely had time to register the blast before Marcus slammed into her, twisting mid-fall to take the debris across his back instead of her chest. The pain was distant, manageable. His nervous system had learned to compartmentalize such things during the expansion wars, when humanity discovered that their evolutionary gift for endurance and pattern recognition made them the galaxy's most efficient killers. "Stay down," Marcus said, his voice level despite the chaos. Around them, the ornate reception hall had transformed into a slaughterhouse. Velsara's violet eyes widened beneath him, her chitinous facial plates flaring in what he'd learned to recognize as shock. She opened her mouth to speak, but Marcus was already scanning the room, cataloging threats with the cold precision that had earned him the nickname Reaper in 3-star systems. 12 attackers. Quantum rifles. Military-grade targeting implants. The attack pattern suggested Kishari rebels, the faction that wanted humanity expelled from the sovereignty at any cost. They'd chosen their moment perfectly during the princess's formal courtship announcement, when she declared her intent to bond with a human. "The queen?" Velsara gasped beneath him. "Where is my mother?" The Kashari monarch stood motionless on her raised dais, surrounded by her personal guard. Unlike the panicking nobles fleeing in all directions, the queen remained perfectly still, her obsidian crown catching the emergency lights. She was watching him, had been watching since the moment he'd moved to protect her daughter. Their eyes met across the carnage, and Marcus felt the weight of her evaluation settle over him like a physical thing. The queen's mandibles shifted in what might have been satisfaction. "Or recognition! Your Majesty!" one of the rebels screamed, bringing his weapon to bear on the dais. "This human contamination of our bloodline ends now." The queen's guard moved, but Marcus was faster. He'd already calculated trajectory wind resistance from the emergency ventilation, and the rebels' reaction time. His hand found the ceremonial knife at his hip, a gift from Velsara during their 3rd formal meeting, and sent it spinning through smoke and chaos. The blade buried itself in the rebel's throat with surgical precision, severing his primary vocal cords and carotid equivalent. The alien dropped without another sound. "Impossible," another attacker whispered, but Marcus was already moving. He pulled Velsara behind a toppled column, positioned her against the wall, and stepped into the open with his hands raised. "I'm unarmed," he announced, his voice carrying over the din. "A lie. A human was never truly unarmed. Take me if that's what you want. Leave the princess and her people." "Marcus! No!" Velsara's cry was desperate, but he'd already committed to the play. 7 rebels remained standing, their weapons trained on him. Perfect. Predictable. The lead rebel laughed, a clicking sound that echoed off marble walls. "You think we want you alive, human?"
"You're the disease, the corruption."
"The thing that convinced our princess to forsake her own kind for a soft-skinned alien who can't even see ultraviolet." The rebels tensed. Good. Tension meant divided attention, and divided attention meant mistakes. "I can see what matters," Marcus said quietly. "Another step. I can see that you're standing on a pressure-sensitive tile." 3 of you, actually. It was a bluff. The palace's original defensive systems had been deactivated decades ago during the peace accords, but the rebels didn't know that, and their eyes dropped for just a fraction of a second to check their footing. That fraction was enough. Marcus moved. Not with the flashy acrobatics of action hollows, but with the efficient brutality that human evolution had perfected over millions of years of persistence hunting. He closed the distance to the nearest rebel before the alien's neural pathways could complete their firing sequence, seized the quantum rifle, and redirected its barrel toward his companion. The weapon discharged, and the second rebel's torso simply ceased to exist in a flash of displaced matter. The remaining 5 scattered, but Marcus had already mapped their escape vectors. He dropped low as return fire scorched the air above him, rolled beneath the wild shots, and came up inside the guard of Rebel Number 3, a palm strike to the auditory cluster. The distinctive crack of chitin fracturing. The rebel went down, clutching its head. 4 left. From her dais, Queen Shalzara made the slightest gesture with one elegant talon. Her guards, who had been advancing, stopped immediately. She wanted to see how this played out. Wanted to see what her daughter had chosen. Marcus gave her a demonstration worth observing. He used the environment like a weapon. Toppled furniture for cover, decorative sculptures as projectiles, even the emergency lighting system's predictable flicker pattern to mask his movements. Each action was calculated. Each strike was precise. Humans didn't have the Kashari's natural armor or the Vexthal's telepathic coordination, but they had something more dangerous: the ability to turn anything into a tool and any situation into an advantage. The last rebel tried to use Velsara as leverage, dragging her from behind the column with a blade pressed against her primary artery. "Stop or she dies!" Marcus stopped, raised his hands again, let his expression show surrender even as his mind continued calculating angles, pressure points, the exact distance between them. "Please," he said, and meant it. "She's everything." The rebel's mandibles spread in triumph. Fatal mistake. Emotional victory created chemical responses created predictable neural patterns, and predictable patterns created opportunity. Queen Shalzara's voice cut through the standoff like a blade made of ice. "Release my daughter." The rebel's head swiveled toward the queen, attention dividing for precisely 0.3 seconds. Marcus crossed the distance in that fraction of eternity, his hand finding the pressure point beneath the rebel's primary arm joint. The knife clattered away. A quick rotation. A controlled fall. The rebel hit the ground unconscious, subdued without permanent damage because Velsara was watching, and he needed her to see him as more than just a killer. Silence fell across the ruined hall. Velsara stood trembling, her breathing rapid and shallow. Marcus wanted to go to her, but protocol demanded he face the queen first. He turned to the dais and dropped to one knee, blood, some his, some not, dripping onto pristine marble. "Your Majesty," he said simply. Queen Shalzara descended from her throne with measured grace. Each step was deliberate, her court robes whispering against stone as she approached. Her guard flanked her, but she waved them back with casual authority. When she stood before Marcus, she studied him with eyes that had ruled an empire for 3 centuries. "Rise, Marcus Chen of Earth." Met her gaze without flinching. The queen's mandibles shifted in that expression he still couldn't quite read. 12 attackers," she said softly. "Neutralized in 97 seconds. No civilian casualties. Minimal permanent damage to the perpetrators." She paused. Remarkable restraint for someone with your documented history. Marcus said nothing. The queen already knew everything worth knowing about him. His military record, his psychological profiles, the classified reports about what humanity had become during their violent expansion into the stars. She had known before today, before the courtship announcement, before her daughter had ever met him at that cultural exchange 6 months ago. "Mother," Velsara stepped forward, her voice gaining strength. "Marcus saved my life. Saved all of us." "Yes," the queen agreed, but her eyes never left Marcus's face. "He did. Just as I knew he would." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marcus felt understanding crystallize with cold certainty. This had been a test. Not just the attack, though. He suspected the Queen's intelligence network had detected the plot and allowed it to proceed, but everything. The entire courtship. Every formal meeting. Every carefully orchestrated moment that had led to him falling genuinely, helplessly in love with the alien princess, now staring at her mother with dawning horror. "You knew," Velsara whispered. "You knew there would be an attack." "I knew there would be resistance to your choice," Queen Shalzara corrected. "I knew that choosing a human mate would paint a target on your back for every traditionalist faction in the sovereignty. I also knew that if you insisted on this path, you would need protection that my guards, skilled as they are, could not provide." Her gaze finally shifted to her daughter. "You would need someone who sees threats like breathing, who can turn any moment into survival, who carries warfare in his very bones." Marcus's chest tightened. "I'm not a weapon." "You're something more dangerous. You're a weapon who chooses not to be." She gestured at the unconscious rebel at their feet. "Lesser beings would have killed them all. You subdued them. Preserved life even while taking it. That is the balance my daughter will need." The queen's expression softened fractionally. "That is what I saw in you the first time Velsara brought you before my court. Not a human. Not a killer. But a protector who understands the cost of protection." Velsara moved to Marcus's side, her hand finding his despite the blood and chaos. "You used us," she said to her mother. "Used my feelings. Used him. I prepared you," Queen Shalzara countered. "There is a difference. The galaxy is not kind to those who rule, daughter. You chose to love across species. I ensured that choice came with the means to survive it." She turned to face her assembled court, the nobles slowly emerging from their hiding places. "Let it be known that Princess Velsara's chosen mate has proven himself in blood and restraint. The courtship will proceed, the bonding will be honored." Around them, the Kashari court murmured in shock and grudging approval. but Marcus was watching Velsara's face, seeing the conflict there. Gratitude and betrayal, love and manipulation, all warring behind those violet eyes. "Did you know?" she asked him quietly. "Did you suspect?" Marcus thought about the way the Queen had watched him during formal dinners. The questions about his military service that had seemed like polite interest but had been intelligence gathering. The way Velsara's guard rotation always included veterans who had evaluated his reactions to threats. He'd noticed it all, cataloged it all, and chosen to ignore the obvious conclusion because the alternative was losing her. "Yes," he admitted, "not all of it, but enough. And you said nothing. Would it have changed anything?" He squeezed her hand gently. "Would it have changed what I feel, what you feel? I hate that she was right. I hate that we needed this. I hate that loving you comes with violence. Then let this be the last violence," Marcus said. He raised his voice so the entire court could hear. "I claim right of declaration under Kishari law." The Queen's eyes narrowed. Bold. "What are you doing?" Velsara whispered. Marcus kept his gaze locked on the Queen. "I declare before this court and the sovereignty that any who threaten Princess Velsara threaten me. Any who move against her will answer to humanity's full measure. I claim Protector's Oath. Blood bond. Eternal vigil." He felt Velsara's hand tighten in his. "And I declare that the weapon you see in me serves exactly one purpose now, keeping her safe. Not the throne. Not the sovereignty. Her." Marcus had just invoked one of the oldest Keshari traditions, one usually reserved for bodyguards who had saved a royal's life. By speaking the words publicly, he bound himself to Velsara above all other considerations. Even above Earth. Even above humanity itself. It was a declaration of love wrapped in a threat. A promise that the weapon Queen Shalzara had so carefully evaluated would turn against anyone, human or alien, who tried to harm her daughter. Queen Shalzara's expression was unreadable for a long moment. Then, impossibly, she smiled, a human gesture she'd learned for diplomatic purposes but had never used in court before. "Accepted," she said. "And witnessed." She looked at her daughter. "It seems, Velsara, that you chose more wisely than even I anticipated. He protects you from threats foreign and domestic. Even from me, should I become one." Velsara stepped forward, pulling Marcus with her. "Mother, I love you. I know you did this out of love, too, in your way. But no more tests. No more manipulations. If Marcus and I are to build something together, it has to be built on truth." "Then build it on the truth that stands before us now," the Queen replied. "He is exactly what I believed. What the sovereignty needs. A human who has seen the worst of war and chooses peace. A killer who protects rather than destroys." She raised her voice to address the court. "Clear the hall. Attend the wounded. We will reconvene when order is restored." As the court scrambled to obey, medical teams rushing in to treat the injured guards and rebels, the Queen approached Marcus and Velsara one final time. She placed one chitinous hand on her daughter's shoulder and looked directly at Marcus. "Protect her," she said simply. "That is all I have ever wanted." "With everything I am," Marcus replied. The Queen nodded and withdrew, her guard forming around her as she left the devastated hall. Alone at last amid the controlled chaos of cleanup, Marcus pulled Velsara close. She was shaking, adrenaline and emotion finally catching up with her. "I'm sorry," he murmured against her temple. "Sorry that this is what loving me means." "Don't," she said fiercely. "Don't apologize for being what you are. I chose you knowing the risks, knowing the galaxy would resist. I chose you anyway because when I look at you, I see someone who has every reason to be hard but chooses kindness, every reason to be cruel but chooses compassion, every reason to kill but always tries to save." Marcus felt something in his chest crack open, some wall he'd maintained since the war. "I'm still going to have nightmares about failing to protect you." "Good," Velsara said, pulling back to meet his eyes. "That means you're not a weapon. Weapons don't have nightmares. People do." Around them, the palace staff worked to restore order, but Marcus and Velsara stood together in their small pocket of stillness. The future stretched before them, uncertain and dangerous, filled with political machinations and cultural conflicts that would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But they would face it together. A human who had learned that survival wasn't enough, that protecting what you loved mattered more than any victory, and an alien princess who had chosen him not despite what he was, but because of what he chose to be. Queen Shalzara watched them from a hidden gallery high above, her ancient eyes seeing what few others could. She had gambled her daughter's happiness on a single calculated truth, that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their capacity for violence, but their stubborn refusal to let violence define them. As Marcus kissed Velsara's forehead with infinite gentleness, the queen allowed herself a rare moment of genuine satisfaction. She had found her daughter not just a protector, but a partner who would temper Velsara's idealism with pragmatism, and whose own hardened edges would be softened by her daughter's unwavering belief in peace. The weapon had chosen love over war, and in that choice, Queen Shalzara saw the future of the Kashari sovereignty. A future where humanity's strength and her people's wisdom could forge something neither could achieve alone. She turned away from the gallery, allowing them their moment. There would be time enough for the trials ahead. Time enough for Marcus Chen to prove himself not just in blood and battle, but in the quiet, harder work of building a life with someone from an entirely different world. For now, the queen had her answer. The weapon Incarnate had been tested and found true, not because he could kill, but because when it mattered most, he chose not to.